The concept of happiness, or simply to be happy, is what most people strive for. Nobody likes its polar opposite, sadness, and because of this, they turn to happiness. But what is it exactly? Is it an idea? Is it a being? A material possession? An event? Or just a feeling? This, of course, is an ongoing debate, but Aristotle thinks that it is the greatest good, and that it goes along with virtue of the soul. Happiness is what man seeks above all else. In everything that he does, he seeks to attain happiness. If that is so, then what does this mean? How can one achieve it, and how does it manifest itself? The purpose of this video will be to examine Aristotle's take on happiness, and why he believes it to be the greatest good. Additionally, this video will raise some questions or uncertainties regarding his take on happiness. Taken from Book 1 of his Nichomachean Ethics, Aristotle remarks that most people suppose happiness as doing well and living well, but what they disagree on is how one goes about securing happiness. He begins by examining 3 lives: the life of gratification or pleasure, the life of political activity, and the life of study. The life of gratification is rejected because its pursuit of pleasure is slavish and non-rational. Not to mention that pleasures are incomplete, as it requires more and more of it to make a person happy. This is especially true of drug use, where one's body develops a toleration for the drug of choice that only grows as its usage persists. The next life is the one of political action, where a person seeks honor. This too does not satisfy Aristotle's definition, because it appears too superficial, and that it depends largely on those who honor, rather than on the person being honored. In other words, the political person derives his happiness from the praise of others, but this is inadequate, because for this person there will be no happiness if there is nobody around to bestow honor upon them. Finally, the third life Aristotle believes to be the greatest life, because studying is something that is done for its own sake, thus satisfying the idea of happiness where it's complete and self-sufficient. But what about money-making, or being wealthy? Does that constitute happiness? No, not to Aristotle anyway, because it is something that is forced upon a person. They are compelled to do it, not by choice, but by necessity, so therefore this does not constitute happiness. The examination of these lives leads Aristotle to his next inquiry as to what the good is. The good is an end in itself, meaning that every action a person undertakes is done in the pursuit of some further end. Examples would include a doctor practicing medicine for the health of his patients, a carpenter in the crafting of an object for some further use. You get the picture. For something to grant happiness, for Aristotle, it must be complete, and thus the furthest end. Happiness is the furthest end because it is the end of everything that can be acquired by action. So, happiness also constitutes some action, in addition to merely being an idea? Very much so, and happiness is then thought to originate also in the perception or mindset of a person. It was said earlier that happiness is thought to be living and doing well, but for Aristotle, it also means viewing life in a lens that remains constant despite misfortune. Life is full of success and failure, for if one puts their happiness entirely in fortune, then they will have periods of happiness and despair that swing back and forth like a pendulum. The person who can attain happiness is the one who remains content, even through life circumstances that are not going well. This means that happiness is not only living and doing well, it includes the belief that one's life is in fact going well, despite extraneous misfortune. This links back to perception. I could go further, but this is enough summary for Aristotle's account of the greatest good, of happiness. His account is intriguing because it does seem that happiness is the greatest good, the end of ends, something that is pursued for its own sake. When someone asks why they do what they do, they will probably say because it brings me satisfaction, or it makes me happy. A person who maintains a strong physique will say they do so because they wish to be strong, but you could ask them, well, why do you want to be strong? Their response would then be, because I want to be healthy. Well, why do you want to be healthy? Because I am happy when I am healthy. Aha, there we go. That's the answer that we have been looking for. The idea that happiness is the greatest good can be extrapolated to all other pursuits that aim to bring about some good, satisfaction, or happiness to someone. It makes sense that even with activities such as the pursuit of pleasure, political honor, or wealth, they seek the ultimate end, happiness. But does this not mean that one cannot be happy if they are enacting these activities in their lifetime? Despite the need to continually pursue these endeavors, one could argue that these people are indeed happy, to some extent. After all, if they did not love these activities, then they would not engage in them. For those that chase pleasure, it could be said that even if they need more to garner the same amount, they will continue to do so. It is because it brings them happiness that they do what they do, or so they think. One common belief with happiness is that pleasure equals happiness. After all, nobody thinks that it is painful, right? Not so fast. If we say that pleasure is the same as happiness, we forget to factor in cases where the pleasure has burned out. A person may find an activity enjoyable for a while, but then they may get sick of it as time passes. If that is so, then their happiness will disappear as soon as the want for that desirable activity disappears. This makes happiness seem far more fleeting than those of the other lives. With political honor, a person may believe that they are happy because of the titles that have been placed upon them, in addition to the honor. They receive praise from those who are ready to give it to them. But just like the person who pursues pleasure, it seems that once the independent variable is taken away, so is their happiness. Here it would be the people that give praise, that bestow honor upon the political pursuer. This makes their happiness seem just as volatile as the pleasure seeker. Finally, the money maker could be happy when money is being made, but it seems once again that they are always in need of more of it to be happy. They are plagued by dissatisfaction, and the end that they are seeking will never come. Moving on from here, happiness for Aristotle is not only living and doing well, but believing that one is doing well. Put differently, the person is grateful for their circumstances regardless of what they may be. A count your blessing sort of attitude that appears solid on the surface. Indeed, if a person retains a negative attitude towards life, then nothing will ever be enough to satisfy them. They could have all the status, all the money, and all the power, but it will never be enough. This affliction is quite common among mankind, and one that will never disappear entirely. But for the person who is grateful for everything, this idea of happiness is aligned with their outlook. This is because they realize that life does not always proceed as planned. Beneficial circumstances, as well as detrimental situations, will befall them. Yet they do not despair, and carry on with their perspective. This is where happiness turns into contentment, being content or satisfied with one's situation. This looks desirable on paper, but is it achievable in practice? Is it practical or realistic to believe that a person can remain content in every situation, that they can remain positive in every situation that befalls them? Well, yes and no. There are individuals who can, and for most, they cannot, albeit for one reason or another. The Stoics advocate for a similar mindset, where one relinquishes their thought of control over uncontrollable situations. One should stop fretting over events that are far beyond their control and say, c'est la vie, such is life. I will take it all, regardless of whether it is good or bad. With Aristotle, he could be interpreted as arguing a life of contentment guided by a realistic outlook. Happiness is likely to be found in the simpler things, rather than the finer things. One last area of examination lies in what Aristotle said about how virtue goes hand in hand with happiness. To live virtuously is a benefit of the soul, and this facilitates happiness. This entails the requirement of action to acquire happiness. It is not just some intangible idea. Happiness can manifest itself, but in what way? In material possessions such as wealth? Well, no, because he rejected that earlier. Additionally, material possessions are incomplete because there is always a lack of them. A want for more, so it is incomplete. What about feelings? Happiness is thought to be a feeling, correct? Maybe, because happiness as a feeling may not always manifest itself. Some may feel joy, while others will feel nothing other than contentment, or simply be glad that events are going well. Perhaps happiness is something that only the soul can experience, and that what we take as happiness currently is merely counterfeit. In that case, it begs the question of whether happiness is to be pursued at all, whether it is worth the sacrifices that have been made in order to get it. That will be left for another day, but for now, the idea of happiness will continue to attract much discussion. Individuals pursue what makes them happy, and they will find out for themselves whether it was worth it or not. We are thought to be rational agents, and so we know what is best for a person. Inevitably, we will do so until we die, because that is what we desire the most, to live and do well, but also to be able to look back and believe that we lived well. Once the curtain falls on our lives, we hope that we have found that which we were seeking for so long.